The rain tapped against the windows of the Ravensworth Hotel in London, a soft rhythm echoing the unease inside Clara Merrick's chest. In the tall mirror, she adjusted the emerald green gown that hugged her form, its silk catching the light like river water under moonshine. The dress was a declaration of survival, of something quietly rebuilt. Tonight would be the first time she saw Edward Chamberlain since the day he broke their engagement by email. 6 months of piecing herself together had led to this. She had buried herself in her charity work for children's literacy, had painted again, had learned to walk through mornings without that hollow ache. Yet the invitation to the Chamberlain Foundation gala still lay like a dare on her vanity. When Edward called afterward with his smooth politician's tone, "We should show the world we're civilized now, Clara. People will respect that." She had agreed, foolishly perhaps. Now, as she fastened her grandmother's silver locket around her neck, her hands trembled. The chauffeur's car slid through Chelsea's wet streets, past lamps that blurred into gold streaks. Clara whispered to herself, "You're strong now. He can't touch you." But when the grand facade of the Ravensworth Hall rose before her, columns glittering, a string quartet already playing through open doors, her stomach tightened. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with wealth. Crystal chandeliers, perfume heavy as fog, laughter that cut like glass. Heads turned as she entered. Whispers trailed after her heels like shadows. There she is, the abandoned one. How dare she show her face? Clara kept her chin high, smiling with the grace of a woman who refuses to shrink. And then she saw him. Edward. Perfectly tailored, a smirk meant for cameras, hair so precise it looked lacquered. "Clara," he said in that low, mock-warm tone, "try not to make a scene tonight. Some of us still have reputations." Before she could reply, he turned away to kiss another woman's cheek. She stood alone, the music swelling around her like a mockery. Champagne glasses clinked. A photographer's flash caught her face as she looked away. Then the ring of silver against glass cut through the room, Edward on stage raising his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began with performative sincerity, "I'd like to speak about growth and wisdom." His eyes found hers. "Some of you remember I was once engaged. I nearly made a terrible mistake. Love is rare, but discernment rarer." Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. Clara's pulse thundered. The humiliation was meticulous, public, complete. She gripped her glass so tightly her fingers ached. And then she noticed him. A man at the back of the hall, tall, dark-haired, expression hard as marble yet alive with contained fury. When their eyes met, the noise of the room fell away. He set his glass down and began to walk toward her, step by step. Every eye followed. A silent question hung in the air. Who was he? And what was about to happen? The man's steps were unhurried, yet the crowd seemed to part before him like a tide retreating from stone. His presence silenced the string quartet mid-phrase. Even Edward's polished smile faltered for half a breath. Clara didn't know him. Not yet, but there was something about his eyes, steady, dark, unwilling to tolerate cruelty disguised as charm. He stopped beside her table. "Forgive me for interrupting," he said, voice deep but calm, carrying easily through the hall. "I just can't listen to a man use a celebration to humiliate someone who once trusted him." The air changed. Conversations froze. Waiters halted mid-step. You could almost hear the chandeliers listening. Edward forced a laugh. "And you are?" "Henry Vaughan," the man replied simply. "A guest, and someone who believes dignity shouldn't need an invitation." Murmurs swept across the room. Henry Vaughan? The same entrepreneur who built Vaughan Industries from nothing? The man the press called Britain's quiet millionaire? Clara blinked, the name clicking somewhere in her memory. A technology innovator known for rejecting Chamberlain investments years ago. Edward's face tightened. "This is my event, Mr. Vaughan. You're overstepping." Henry tilted his head slightly. "Then perhaps host your events without turning people into entertainment." His tone was mild, but it carried a weight that made even the waiters straighten. The hush deepened, flashbulbs popped, someone's phone began filming. "Apologies, Miss Merrick," Henry said, turning to her now, his expression softening. "You deserve better than this theater." Before she could answer, he did something no one expected. He reached out, brushed a stray tear from her cheek, and then, without haste or hesitation, kissed her. It wasn't a performance, it wasn't possessive. It was a quiet, defiant act, the kind of gesture that redefined the air around it. For a heartbeat, the hall became utterly still. Then the room erupted. Shocked gasps, clicking cameras, voices tumbling over one another. Edward stood rigid, fury flickering behind his composure. "How dare you?" he began. But Henry had already stepped back, calm as a soldier who'd completed his mission. "If defending someone's dignity offends you," he said, "perhaps that says more about you than about me." He turned to Clara and offered his hand. "Come on. You don't need to stay here." For a moment her body refused to move, every instinct trapped between fear and freedom. Then slowly she set her champagne glass down. She took his hand. Together they walked through the sea of stunned faces, past glittering gowns and frozen smiles, until the cold London night swallowed them in silence. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet stone and something clean, like a second chance. Henry released her hand only when they reached the curb. "I'm sorry if that was too much," he said quietly. "I just couldn't stand by." Clara met his gaze, steady, unscripted. "You didn't." For the first time that evening, her voice didn't shake. Outside, London was washed clean by rain. The grand facade of the Ravensworth shimmered behind them, a palace of glass and gossip. Clara stood by the curb, her breath ghosting in the cool night air. The sounds of the gala, the laughter, the cameras, the cruelty, faded into a distant echo. Only the steady rhythm of raindrops dripping from Henry's coat broke the silence. He ran a hand through his hair, eyes fixed on the dark stretch of road ahead. "I might have made things worse for you in there," he said finally. His voice was low, quiet, but weighted with sincerity. Clara shook her head slowly. "No one has ever stood up for me like that, not even when I was with him." The words came out trembling but true. Henry's jaw flexed, a flicker of anger beneath his calm. "People like him feed on silence. I just couldn't let it continue." He glanced at her then, his expression softening. "You handled it with grace, though, better than most would." A cab pulled up nearby, the driver eyeing them curiously before looking away. Clara didn't move. She was too aware of the strange stillness between them. Not awkward, but charged, like two notes that somehow found harmony. "You don't owe me anything," she said quietly. "You don't even know me." Henry smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but I know that look. The one you had in there. That mix of pain and defiance. It's the same one I used to see in the mirror." Clara frowned, curious. "Someone humiliated you too?" He gave a small laugh, one without humor. "In a different way. Years ago, I trusted the wrong person, a business partner. She used what I built to climb higher and left me to fall with the blame. The press called me reckless. Investors pulled out overnight. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered." "What happened?" "I rebuilt," he said simply, "but I made a promise after that, to never stand by when someone's being crushed by arrogance or power." A gust of wind lifted the edge of Clara's dress. She crossed her arms, partly for warmth, partly to hold herself together. So tonight was, what, a rescue mission? Henry's eyes met hers, serious, unflinching. No, just decency. Something we don't see enough of in rooms like that. They stood there for a long moment. The city moved around them, taxis gliding by, streetlights flickering gold against puddles. Yet time felt paused. Finally Henry gestured down the street. There's a cafe still open a few blocks away. No champagne, no audience, just quiet. Clara hesitated, then nodded. I think I'd like quiet, he smiled, almost imperceptibly. Then let's find some. As they began to walk, the last drops of rain tapped softly against the pavement, and Clara realized something unexpected. Her heart, though bruised, was no longer heavy. The cafe sat tucked into a quiet corner of Kensington High Street, its windows fogged by the late-night drizzle. Inside, only 2 lamps glowed, a soft amber haze against the dark. The barista looked up, surprised to see anyone at that hour, but Henry just smiled politely and ordered 1 black coffee. And a chamomile tea, please? When Clara stepped in behind him, the warmth of the room wrapped around her like a blanket. Her emerald gown looked out of place amid the chipped tables and humming refrigerator, yet somehow the setting fit her better than the glittering ballroom ever had. They sat by the window, rain tracing silver lines down the glass. For a while, neither spoke. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable, it was healing. Finally, Henry broke the silence. You know, he said, stirring his coffee absently, when I walked into that gala tonight, I told myself I'd only stay 15 minutes. I can't stand those events. The masks, the polished cruelty. But then I saw you standing there and... He stopped, choosing his words carefully. You looked like someone fighting to stay upright in a storm. Clara smiled faintly. And you decided to play hero? His lips curved, a quiet humor in them. I don't think of myself as anyone's hero. I just don't look away anymore. The tea warmed her hands, but his words warmed something deeper. You know, she said softly, I spent weeks convincing myself I could face him again, that I was stronger now. And yet when he spoke, it felt like I was right back in the moment he left, small, invisible. Henry studied her face. He wanted you to feel that. People like him mistake cruelty for control. But you didn't disappear, Clara. You showed up. She blinked, surprised by the simple power of that. Showed up? That's more than most do after being broken, he said. Trust me, I've tried hiding. It doesn't help. He leaned back, gaze turning distant. I was engaged once, years ago. Her name was Isabel. We built a company together, or so I thought. When success came, she wanted more of it, faster, louder. One night I found out she'd sold my shares behind my back. Told the press I couldn't handle pressure. My silence nearly destroyed me. Clara listened, the faint ticking of the clock filling the space between them. How did you survive that? Henry shrugged lightly. I stopped trying to prove my worth to the wrong people. I built something smaller, steadier, and I started believing in quiet things again, like integrity or tea at midnight. She laughed softly, wiping at her eyes. That sounds peaceful. It can be, he said, but it's better shared. Outside, the rain eased to a whisper. Clara looked at him, really looked, and felt a pulse of warmth that wasn't gratitude but recognition. For the first time since her world had cracked, she wasn't alone in the silence. Morning crept into London softly, brushing the rooftops with pale light. Clara woke to the quiet hum of the city and the faint scent of chamomile still lingering on her coat. For a moment she didn't move. The memories of the night before floated back slowly. Edward's sneer, the kiss that silenced the room, and Henry's calm voice in the storm. She smiled faintly before the doubt returned. What now, she thought. What if it was just a moment of impulse, a stranger's kindness, nothing more? Her eyes drifted to her kitchen table. A folded napkin sat there beside her handbag. She frowned, picked it up. On the napkin, in clean, deliberate handwriting, were 4 words. Keep showing up. H. She exhaled, a sound somewhere between a sigh and a laugh. He must have slipped it into her bag when he walked her to the cab. Somehow that small gesture meant more than any bouquet ever could. By noon, the world had already spun the story into something else. Online tabloids blazed with headlines. Tech tycoon defends ex-fiancé's victim. Public kiss shocks gala crowd. Photos of the kiss had gone viral, twisted and repackaged into every possible version of truth. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating, dozens of messages, some sympathetic, others cruel. One from Edward: "Congratulations, Clara, you finally got your attention." She stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Then, instead of replying, she opened her studio window and let the autumn air in. The noise of the world didn't matter here. The sunlight spilled across her half-finished canvas. A storm breaking into color. Her phone buzzed again, but this time the name on the display made her heart lift. Henry Vaughan. "Ignore the noise," his message read. "They'll move on by tomorrow. But if you'd like a place to hide from it all, I know a park that doesn't care about headlines." Clara smiled, typing back before she could overthink it. "I could use some quiet." 2 hours later, she met him by the Serpentine in Hyde Park. The sky was bruised with clouds, the air thick with the smell of wet leaves. Henry was waiting on a bench, hands in his coat pockets, expression unreadable but kind. "You handled the morning well," he said as she sat down. "Define well," she murmured. "I've had 3 journalists outside my flat and 1 old school friend asking if we are secretly engaged." He chuckled softly. "That's London for you. They make myths faster than they make tea." She looked at him, studying the quiet lines of his face, the calm that didn't feel forced. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Stay so composed when the world tries to twist your truth." Henry paused, glancing at the grey water. "Because I learned something, Clara. When people lie about you, the best revenge is to live so honestly that no one can repeat the lie twice." She followed his gaze, the rippling reflection of clouds moving across the lake. Somewhere deep inside, the ache began to ease. Maybe this wasn't the end of a humiliation story. Maybe it was the beginning of a braver one. 3 weeks later, the city had settled into its late autumn rhythm. Grey mornings, golden afternoons, and the promise of rain never too far away. Clara's studio in Camden smelled of paint, varnish, and something new. Purpose. The once blank canvases now bloomed with deep blues and soft golds, fragments of light breaking through darkness. She stood by the largest one, brush poised mid-air. It was a sky. Not perfect, not still, but alive, scarred by storms and yet defiantly bright. The painting had begun the morning after that night at the Ravensworth, when she decided to paint not from pain but from endurance. A gentle knock came at the door. She turned, surprised, to find Henry leaning against the frame, holding 2 paper cups. "I come bearing peace offerings," he said with that subtle half-smile. "Black coffee for me? Cinnamon latte for you?" "Don't ask how I remembered." Clara laughed softly. "You bribed the barista, didn't you?" "Absolutely," he said, "and possibly threatened to invest in her shop." He walked around the room, studying the paintings in quiet admiration. "You've turned the rain into something beautiful." Clara set her brush down. "I suppose it's my way of proving the night didn't define me." "It didn't," Henry said simply. "You did that yourself." His sincerity disarmed her. In the weeks since the scandal, he had become something unexpected, steady, patient, unintrusive. He checked on her without hovering, defended her when gossip tried to resurrect, and somehow made silence feel safe. Actually, he continued, glancing toward one corner. There's a reason I stopped by. A friend of mine curates exhibitions for emerging artists. Small galleries, but good audiences. I showed her a photo of your work. She wants to meet you. Clara blinked. You showed her my paintings? He nodded, without asking first, which was presumptuous. But I thought, if the world saw what I see here, maybe it'd talk about your art instead of that video. She looked at him, caught between gratitude and disbelief. Henry, you don't have to fix this for me. I'm not trying to fix it, he said gently. I'm trying to amplify what's already strong. Something in her chest tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like that, without pity, without the subtle arrogance of rescue. He saw her not as someone fragile, but as someone worth believing in. She turned back to the painting, blinking against the sudden sting in her eyes. You really think people would care about my work? I know they will, he said, because it's honest, because it looks like healing, and people are starving for that. The words settled into her like sunlight through cloud. Outside, the rain began again, light, rhythmic, steady. And for once, Clara didn't flinch at the sound. Henry glanced toward the window. You know, he murmured, rain isn't always a bad omen. Sometimes it's just the sky reminding us to begin again. When she looked back at him, he was already smiling, quiet, unhurried, sure. The gallery was smaller than she'd imagined. A converted bookshop near Notting Hill, with uneven floors and the smell of old paper still clinging to the air. But as Clara stood in the center of the softly lit room, surrounded by her own paintings, it felt vast. Each canvas told a piece of her story, not of heartbreak, but of reclamation.
People milled about quietly, sipping wine, murmuring compliments. The title of her collection hung above the door, After the Rain. Her palms were damp. This was her first exhibition. Her first chance to step into the world without apology. She had promised herself she wouldn't look for Henry. And yet her eyes drifted to the door every time it opened. When he finally walked in, she didn't notice him at first.
He stayed near the back, speaking little, watching her as she laughed nervously with visitors. He didn't interrupt, didn't draw attention, just stood there with that calm, steady presence that had become a quiet anchor in her life. Then the mood shifted. A new ripple moved through the room. She followed the whispers and froze. Edward Chamberlain. He stood near one of her largest pieces, hands in his pockets, that familiar smug half-smile back in place. Interesting, he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Who would have thought humiliation could be turned into art? The words dropped like stones into the air. Clara's heart stuttered. For a moment, the old panic clawed its way up her throat. But then she saw Henry's reflection in the gallery window, not moving, but watching, ready if she needed him. Only this time she didn't. She walked toward Edward, each step measured, quiet, steady. The crowd fell silent. You know, she said calmly, meeting his eyes, you taught me something valuable that night. Oh? His smirk deepened. And what's that? That shame only lives as long as you let it. He blinked, thrown off. I used to think your approval defined me, she continued, but it turns out you were just another man afraid of women who don't stay broken. A few people gasped softly. Edward's expression cracked for a second before hardening again. Still dramatic, I see. No, she said simply. Just honest. She turned away before he could reply. The room seemed to exhale with her. Henry stepped forward as she approached, his eyes full of something that felt like quiet pride. That, he murmured, was strength. Clara smiled faintly. That was overdue. They stood together as applause rippled through the gallery. Not for a spectacle, but for something earned. Outside, through the glass, the evening sky was clearing, streaks of blue breaking through the last of the storm. For the first time in a long time, Clara didn't need saving. She simply needed to be seen, and Henry saw her completely.